Looking for a guaranteed way to create content that resonates with your audience? Start a podcast. Interview your ideal clients and let them choose the topic of the interview. Because if your ideal clients care about the topic, there's a good chance the rest of your audience will care about it too. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Travis King, here at Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Phil Mobley, who is the head of research and tenant experience at Building Engines, Inc. Phil, what is up, my friend? What's going on?
Hey, Travis. I'm doing all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing good. Can't complain. Living another day, right?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on.
Of course. So yeah, let's dive right in. Today, you're going to be sharing a little bit about how you use research to generate thought leadership content for positioning, lead gen, and PR opportunities. But before we get into that, I'd love for you to share with listeners a little bit about yourself and what you and the team at Building Engine are up to these days.
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with Building Engines. We are a software provider, software as a service, and we serve the commercial real estate industry. So our platform is active in over 2 billion commercial square feet right now. We help our clients more smoothly operate their facilities. We help them automate a lot of the processes. And then crucially, we serve as the link between a building management team and the tenants and the occupants that are in the space that those building management teams own and operate. So that's what our software does. My role in the company, I wear sort of two hats. Day to day, I lead our tenant experience development team. So any part of our software platform that the tenant occupants interact with, that's what my team works on. But then also I'm head of research, and that role is more geared toward producing thought leadership content that we use for marketing and lead gen, like you were mentioning in the introduction.
Awesome. And I find it super interesting that as a researcher, you have an integral role in the marketing department, because it's not oftentimes you find, a marketing department has their own internal research expert that can go dive and find all the golden nuggets from all the different resources and places that you're able to get to.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's a tie to a software product management role as well, in that we're doing research all the time on what our users want and need and where the gaps are from a technology perspective in the marketplace. So, it is unique, I think, particularly in our sector of the industry, but it also makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of synergy there between what I do on the product side and on the marketing side.
Got it. So, I'd love for us to, dive right in and could you tell us a little bit about how does it work? Like, what's the process like when it comes to research and, generating ideas for different thought leadership content that you guys are using?
The thing about good research is that you want to start with, what do you want to be able to say at the end of this, right? You begin with the end in mind. Usually that starts with a solid hypothesis. So in other words, you don't necessarily want to just go collect all the possible facts and start boiling the ocean. You really want to have a goal. So a couple of examples that we've used in our research. One was, we had a hypothesis based on understanding our clients that a successful commercial real estate management team operates their buildings maybe a little bit differently than those that are less successful. And so we did some research that became what we call the Commercial Real Estate Operations Report. And in that report, we examined the whole realm of commercial real estate operations, from preventive maintenance and service request management to technology and communications and staff management and the whole nine yards. And from that research, we were able to essentially prove out our hypothesis that yes, the buildings that are the most successful in terms of having the highest rents, having the highest occupancy, that's how the buildings make money. So the ones that do that the best, they really do practice different operational techniques and engage in different operational best practices. And those things differentiate them in the marketplace. So that report has been valuable to us, not only to just show, hey, look, we're thought leaders, but to do something a little bit provocative, to provide new insight to our existing clients, of course, but also to prospects. Another example of that is we have somewhat of a different and provocative take on the tenant experience. There's a lot of movement, particularly in the technology space in the commercial real estate industry, toward mobile apps and trying to get tenant occupants to engage with and use mobile apps. And our take on that is that we're a little bit skeptical of that. We're not sure that's the way tenants really want to interact with their building and the management team there. And so we did some research into that as well that resulted in what we call the Tenant Experience Gap Report. And in that piece of content, we were able to, again, prove out this hypothesis and identify that, you know what, the building management team's understanding of what the tenants want and what they're expecting in terms of experience and communication and interaction, it's really different than what the tenants themselves are expecting and what they're hoping to get from the management team. So, you asked a question about how these come about. Well, they come about with having a position or having a hypothesis, in our case, something that we look at maybe a little bit differently than the industry. And so the research helps you bear that out, and it also helps you make some noise. So we'll talk some more about how we've been able to use those pieces, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny that you say that because I was actually in my tenant app earlier today, and it's interesting how they have it laid out, and they, expect their tenants to go in here and actually find updates to things when it's just another platform that I need to figure out my login for and remember a password for. And then even once you get in there, it's not like the UI is 100% up to date. And I'm like, nope, I totally understand where Phil's coming from, because I definitely have this pain point as a tenant right now.
Yeah, and I, this is not really the purpose of this call, but just for some context, I mean, our position is essentially that apps can look nice and feel great, but it's hard to get people to use them. And so where we really see the tenant experience going is where most of the rest of our lives are going, which is through messaging, right? So, if I could get an update or submit a service request or register a visitor all through an AI-enabled text messaging app or text messaging bot, then we think that's a win. And so that's sort of where we're going in a product direction. And we're doing that because of the research that we did into, hey, this is what tenants really want to do anyway. So, number one, the research ended up supporting our product vision, but also helping us tell the story of this is why we're going in this direction, and this is why it's better, and this is why you should listen.
Right. No, I really value that. And I think it's something that a lot of commercial real estate operations companies should aspire to think about it in thinking about where their customers are headed. Because I mean, as we're kind of going into kind of the next phase of the conversation, my next thought is thinking about, some of the ways that other B2B marketers can leverage these sorts of methods in their organizations to kind of take back something that they can use, from, your research or from your process.
Yeah, sure. So what we have done as a starting point in terms of output is to put together really well-produced, well-written research reports. And we've engaged, when necessary, external people to help us design, to help us copyright. We have some internal capabilities in the data analysis piece. So we were able to do a lot with that ourselves. But where we didn't have the expertise, we found it and produced some high quality pieces that make really great leave behinds. We have found that they get very senior level eyes. It's an easy, a report like that is an easy thing to take with you on an airplane ride, for example, or a train ride. And so we get feedback that, hey, this or that senior leader in this or that real estate company saw your report and really enjoyed it, and now they want to have a conversation. So that's one thing. But beyond that, when you have a wealth of information that you've collected through research, you can also turn that into a lot of different kinds of content pieces as well. So we've put together blog posts. We have pitched and placed bylines in trade publications. I did that just last week, in fact. We have put on our own webinars. We have participated in industry organizations and their educational output. We've had speaking engagements. I went to Shanghai in September this year to present some of the findings from our tenant experience gap report. So that was an amazing opportunity, both for me personally and for the company. So it's the kind of thing that you do invest in to produce. But once you do that, it's not that the content is evergreen, but it does have a fairly long shelf life. And you can get lots of smaller content pieces out of it that then you can use to push forward across a variety of different platforms.
Hey everybody, Logan with Sweetfish here. You probably already know that we think you should start a podcast if you haven't already. But what if you have and you're asking these kinds of questions? How much has our podcast impacted revenue this year? How's our sales team actually leveraging the podcast content? If you can't answer these questions, you're actually not alone. This is why Casted created the very first content marketing platform made specifically for B2B podcasting. Now you can more easily search and share your audio content while getting greater visibility into the impact of your podcast. The marketing teams at Drift, Terminus, and here at Sweetfish have started using Casted to get more value out of our podcasts, and you probably can too. You can check out the product in action at casted.us/growth. That's casted.us/growth. All right, let's get back to the show.
Sounds like a smart plan to me.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of times marketers struggle with figuring out ways to repurpose content and doing, one-off something that might not be able to be, reused or transformed to a different sort of platform. And you guys are doing it really, really well and taking, that pillar piece of content and being the research and then figuring out different ways to disseminate that content across multiple different channels, whether it be webinars, blog posts, podcasting, whatever the channel that you guys decide. So
and I can give you sort of a concrete example of that from the Tenant Experience Gap report. I mean, part of the question that we wanted to answer is, well, what is the tenant experience anyway? How are we defining that? In our industry, it's a term that gets thrown around, but it's used very loosely and people don't really define that in a disciplined way. So our full report alludes to that, but then we came back and created a supplemental presentation about, okay, well, here's what this actually means, and here's what it means for you and what you should do about it. So we've been able to give that presentation in a variety of different formats and forums. But then we also were able to break the presentation itself down into 3 or 4 different blog posts that we were able to publish. So there's really been a cascading effect from the full research to a presentation-based view of it to breaking it down even smaller into bite-sized chunks that are consumable in platforms like LinkedIn and our company blog and even some industry trade magazines.
Nice. Thanks so much for that concrete example. I think that'll be super helpful for the listeners, especially when it comes down to figuring out how they can implement this research in their own companies. And then one final question. Why do you believe research is a great method for other marketers in their, respective roles?
There's a lot of reasons. I mentioned that we've been able to get our research in front of senior eyes. And I think a lot of the reason for that is that it is, of course, it's motivated toward increasing our brand awareness and generating leads for us, but it also does provide real value for our marketplace, whether or not they're clients, right? So if you're trying to get in front of those decision makers' eyes, they'd rather read something that's interesting to them and that adds value immediately than just a simple sales pitch. So that's one reason. I think another is it really helps with positioning the company. I mentioned our commercial real estate operations report. The scope of that report certainly included the aspects of operations that our software enables, but it was also broader than that. And so from a positioning standpoint, it tells the marketplace, Building Engines is not only a software provider, but we are experts in this market. And so therefore, by implication, you can trust us to design and maintain and serve software because we understand the entirety of operations and the challenges that you, our marketplace, are facing. So it's very helpful from a positioning standpoint. And I think it's, if you can invest in the capability to produce something like that, it does pay dividends down the road.
Got it. Well, Phil, this has been such an amazing and information and insightful episode. So listeners, just want to, wrap it up. And, number one, some key takeaways that I just learned: always start with a solid hypothesis, leverage research reports so that you can use them to then transform the initial content into multiple different pieces of micro content. And, finally, research reports actually provide real value for the marketplace, whether or not they're your ideal clients. And it's also a very helpful way for you to get in front of decision makers. So, Phil, thanks so much again for hopping on today and sharing some of these insights with us. And, as we wrap up, this has been a great conversation. If listeners want to stay connected with you or follow up to ask any questions on this topic, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, great question. So my email address at Building Engines is it's pmobley, PMOBLEY at buildingengines.com. You can also find me on Twitter at ValeriusRex. Either of those will get in front of me pretty quickly.
Thanks so much, Phil. We really appreciate you being on the show today.
It's been a pleasure, Travis. I appreciate it.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.